Welcome back, guys. Jay here. This is part 2 of the 3-part camera and combat system that we're going to add to the player. So make sure you guys watch part 1 of the combat system before you start this session. So in this, the objective is, guys, we're first going to set up a reticle. Reticle is that little dot in the center of the screen that basically points to what you are currently aiming, which allows your players to easily aim at things, right? So we're going to set that up. That's quite straightforward. It's just a UI system. So I'm going to introduce you to the basics of UI systems in this lesson as well. But don't worry, we're going to dive deeper into that in the next section, which is the user interface setup. So we're going to brush into the UI in this session, but we're going to go deeper in the next module itself, right? Which is completely based on ammo, displaying the ammos, the health, and things like that, the heads-up displays. So don't worry about UI in this lesson too much. That being said, the next thing we're going to set up in this video is the script for our aim camera. So we're going to create a new script called aim camera, which basically allows the player to look around while you're in aim mode so you can aim at things, right? Once that's done, we're good to go with the aiming setup. And then in the third video of this combat system series, we're going to basically do the actual shooting of a bullet. All right, that being said, we'll set up the reticle. Guys, one thing I really recommend you guys to do, and you're gonna see this when you're in the environment setup as well, is to organize these things. So as you can see, the hierarchy is getting kind of crazy when you add a lot of things into your scene. I have a bunch of things over here, and it's getting kind of crazy over here. So what you can do to fix this is you can group these things into a parent game object. So you can sort of hide everything, all of these game objects, into a parent group game object. So let's just do that. I'm going to just move everything into same level so that we can just group them easily. So biplane is basically my flow as well. So there you go. Everything's in one order. I'm just going to select all of these game objects, right click, and then select create empty parent. When you do that, all of these game objects get grouped into one empty game object, and you can call that environment. It's just an organization thing. If you guys don't want to do that, you can skip it. It's not required. It's optional, and you can now hide everything. See how clean everything looks? It's just an organization thing that you got to do when you're actually building a big game. Actually, any game, because any game can get very messy if you add a lot of game objects in the scene. Back to the lesson, guys. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna right-click on the hierarchy, go to UI, and then click on Canvas. All right. That's right-click, UI, and Canvas. So what this does is we're gonna get a UI canvas. It's almost like a drawing board when you're drawing something. The canvas, it's pretty much the same thing. You basically get this UI invisible canvas where we're gonna create buttons, or we can add text or any sort of UI that shows up on the screen, right? In this case, we're only gonna set up the reticle icon in the middle of the screen, right? So where is this canvas? It's invisible, guys. But if you go to the scene view, you can kind of see it. It's this massive white empty space up there, right? So it just has the board up there. We can't actually see that in the game view because it's supposed to be hidden, right? It's not supposed to be shown to the player except for all the things inside of the canvas. So here's a little workspace hack that I always use. Right-click on your scene, go to Add tab, and create another scene. So with this, you can have two separate scenes looking at different angles of the game. That's a little hack. So you can have multiple scenes pointing to different sections of the game. But I usually use the second scene tab as a 2D view. So click on this 2D button in the second scene, which just gives you a little look on the canvas. So if you double click the canvas while you're in the second scene, you can immediately see this white box. Ignore this line over here, which is basically your camera. But this white rectangle here is a representation of your screen over here. See this? That's the same thing. So this canvas is basically where we're going to design our reticle, and then also your HUD systems. We're going to have a health option later. We're going to have a bullet indicator later. But in this lesson, like I mentioned, it's just the reticle. So if you go back to the first scene view, that's your 3D. Second one, your UI. All right. So right click on your canvas, then go to UI, and then click on image. All right. So with that, we have this little square in the middle of the screen. So you can already see that in your game view with this. So I'm going to rename this image to reticle. You can always rename by right-clicking and click on rename. Or you can even do that over here in the top right. Cool. So reticle. So let's change the shape though. I want it to be a circle. So just go over to source image, and Unity already has a couple of, default shapes that we can use. So which is going to be pretty useful. So if you scroll to the bottom of this, so how did I go there again? I'll repeat this. Click on reticle, the right hand side in the image component, click on this source image. There's a little dot here, guys. Just click that and you'll have this sprite selector. All right, you can bring in your own sprites if you want to, which we'll cover in another lesson. But in this section, however, I'm just going to use the default sprites that Unity has. So if you scroll to the bottom, there's something known as a knob, which is a circle. So I'm just going to select that. And then there you go. We have a circle in the center. Obviously, that's too big. How do we adjust that? You already know it. It's a scale tool. So click on the scale tool. Just like how you do in the Unity 3D world, you just adjust it. See how the shape adjusts? So use the white knob here in the center of this canvas to adjust it. Because guys, if you use this red or the green one, it's just gonna stretch in one side. Undo, I don't want that. Same here, undo, I don't want that. If you click this white square, uniformly stretches this knob. So I want it to be kind of a tiny reticle, something like that is pretty good. Maybe a little bigger. Yeah, something like that is pretty good. So there you go. That's your reticle. So do you want to display this all the time? That would suck, right? See, if I play the game now, reticle is always there. I don't want that. I only want it in this mode. See, this looks pretty good, right? So I'm gonna hide this by default, deactivate it. We learned that lesson last one in the last session. Sorry, tongue twister there. So if you go to the previous lesson, guys, that's where we learned about how you can deactivate and activate game objects, right? In this lesson, we're pretty much going to repeat that. Just deactivated the reticle, but we're going to turn it on when you're in the aiming mode. Now, how we're going to do that is pretty much going to the same script, the third-person controller, and while you're aiming, you're going to activate your reticle. Straightforward. You guys know how to do that. So follow these steps. If you scroll to the top, we're going to create a new reference here in the aiming section. We're going to say public game object reticle. Right? And then scroll over here. When you're aiming, which is the right mouse button, we're going to say reticle dot set active true, similar to the aim camera. Right? And we're going to do the same thing over here. When you're going away from the aim mode, we're going to get rid of the reticle. So we're going to say reticle dot set active false. That's it, guys. So if you go back to Unity now, you got to drag that reticle into your player controller, just like we did earlier. Camera. So click on player. If you scroll to the bottom, you should have a new reticle slot here. Just drag your reticle from your canvas to this slot. That being said, you're good to go. Let's test it out. So when you start the game, reticle is not there because we deactivated it. There you go. So when you aim, the reticle shows up. Cool. All right, this looks good. That looks pretty good. So if you want, guys, you can adjust this to the center of the screen so that obviously the aiming is much more accurate. So that's something that we're going to cover in the shooting part of the section, but this is good enough for now. And then what we can do next is we can set up the scripts for rotating the camera. So for this, we have a new script, guys. I've included that in the bottom of this video. There's a new script called aim camera. We're going to attach that to our combat camera. So right click, create in your scripts folder, create a new C# script called aim camera. All right, I'm going to put that in my scripts folder. Right, we do. So what we're going to do first is we're going to attach that to the aim camera. So when I say aim camera, it's the same thing as combat camera. So go to player. Combat camera is turned off. The aim camera is turned off. So we're going to drag our aim camera here, and then we are all attached now, all good to go. Let's double click the aim camera. I've included the script, guys, so feel free to download that and basically copy and paste that. So I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I'm going to walk you through what we're actually doing in the aim camera just to save time to make the video shorter, right? So feel free to take your time, understand it, but here's my explanation of what the aim camera does. So guys, what the aim camera actually does essentially is lock the player from looking around too much. Basically, we're not gonna allow the player to do the same third-person controls, which is You know how the third person camera works, where you can look around, look up the player, look down at the player and different angles. We're not going to do that in the aim camera, right? Because we are locked into the aim mode. We're only going to allow the player to, however, look around like this, right? That is fine. That allows the player to just sort of aim in different directions, but we're not going to let the camera go around the player is what I'm trying to say, right? Only the player will be allowed to rotate and look around, right? This is exactly what it does. It's a pretty simple code, to be honest. Like, it just has a bunch of comments here to make it easy for you guys to understand. So the first thing we do is we get reference to the player, right? Transform refers to the right-hand side component in the inspector. It's a player. And then we also get reference to the gun, right? The reason is we kind of want the gun's forward direction, so we don't have a gun yet, but we're gonna sort of drag in a pistol as well right after the script. So we need a reference to the gun so that we know where the gun is turned to, right? Because the player could be turned to a different direction, but the gun can be slightly offset like this, which is why we get the reference to the gun. So we don't get the player's direction, forward direction, we get the gun's forward direction, right? And the next thing is we get reference to the mouse X and mouse Y values. So we know where the mouse is currently sort of turned to or sort of moved to. So it's the same thing as the camera, the third person camera. And then we have a mouse sensitivity. We can adjust the speed. And then we have a Boolean here that says aiming or not, right? That's basically how we're going to keep track of whether the player is aiming or not, right? And then in the start, what we're going to do is, guys, initialize mouse X and Y with the player's current Y rotation. Now, why are we doing this? It's simply because, guys, when we go into the aim mode, we want to make sure that the aim camera or the player is currently turned to where the mouse, or actually the mouse is adjusted to where the player is currently looking at, right? Let me rephrase it. So if you don't do these two lines, these two values that we are, two lines of code that we're looking at over here, what it's going to do is it's going to immediately get the mouse's current position and turn the player to that direction, which is going to be very glitchy, right? Because the player could be turned to this direction, but the mouse could be over here in your right-hand side, physical space in real world. But if you immediately go into aiming mode, the player is going to snap to that direction. We don't want that. We want the mouse X and mouse Y values to start off from where the player is currently turned to, so that when we go into aim mode, it just directly looks at what's in front of it, right? So I hope that explanation makes any sense, right? And then in the update mode, what we're doing is if you're aiming, we're going to get the mouse's axis, mouse X, mouse Y. It's very similar to how we get the axis of player's movement, horizontal, vertical. But in this case, we're getting the mouse X and mouse Y. And then you multiply by the sensitivity, which is the speed of rotation, right? And instead of saying equals, we're saying plus equals because we're adding to the mouse X value, right? Which means wherever you are, when we basically move the mouse to the right or whatever, we basically add to that value. So basically you can keep looking to the left or keep looking to the right, right? That's the perfect way to explain that in English, I think. But it'll start making more sense as we go. Mouse Y, now we've added a clamp option here. Now, what does clamp mean in C#? Guys, clamp means we basically clamp it, like limit the mouse movement between two values, right? Minus 35 clamp for Y means that you can't go beyond that level downward. So you can't look beyond a certain limit, right? So you can't rotate more and go 180 degrees to your, back angle, right? So the same thing upwards, if player is only allowed to look up until this point, 60, the value is 60. You can obviously adjust this to your liking, but if you increase that, the player is going to be able to look up even more or look behind, which is not ideal, right? So minus 35 and 60 works really well. I put those values in. So mouse Y is always clamped between these two limits. Next thing is the player is always rotated based on mouse Y and mouse X rotations. That makes sense, right? So when the mouse is moved, the player is also rotated to those axes. And we do that using this thing called quaternion.euler. Now, don't get too caught up with this, guys. It's going to start making sense as you keep developing games. But quaternion refers to a rotation value, rotation of certain values. Mouse X, mouse Y. All right? It's just a way of calculating currently which direction the player should be looking at, and then basically where to turn and rotate the camera to. All right, that's basically the explanation for quaternion.euler and how mouse X and mouse Y values are used to calculate that rotation. All right. And then the next thing is point the gun in the direction the camera is facing. So if he's aiming, we're going to basically turn the gun towards that direction, right? We're going to basically rotate the gun towards that direction. So that kind of looks like you're rotating the gun to that direction while you're playing the game, right? Which is going to look cool. And then start aiming gets called from another script, guys. So we're going to create this method over here, which basically turns on is aiming, and it's going to start basically calculating this bit over here. So where do we call start aiming, guys? We can do that in your third-person controller. Your third-person controller, when we start aiming, is where we're going to tell the aim camera, okay, the player is now in the aiming mode. You can basically do that rotation calculation. All right. So here's what we're going to do in the third-person controller, guys. We're going to basically activate right after the reticle. We're going to basically activate that by adding this 2 lines of code. What this does is, let me just say, activate aim camera rotations, right? What this does is it gets reference to the aim camera from our combat camera, because the combat camera is what has the aim camera script, right? Inspector, which we're going to add in a bit. And if you guys remember the .get component method, that is basically what gets any of those components on the right-hand side. I'm assuming you guys have watched the previous sessions. And basically, we're going to say start aiming, which is referring to aim camera's start aiming method. When we say aim camera script or start aiming, we're referring to this method here, which is a public method, right? That being said, guys, that's about it. And then basically, this is going to allow us to now start aiming and then turning this camera around, right? Let's start testing this out. We go to the player now, let it build. We should have in the inspector all of this set up, which you should already have, guys. So we have a combat camera, reticle, and then if you expand the player, we have the combat camera, right, which is kindly turned off when you start the game. We only turn it on when the player right-clicks on your mouse. So over here, we've added the aim camera. As you can see, all these new variables have shown up, which is pretty good, which is exactly what we need. But in the combat camera, we got to drag all of these values in. Now, for the player, it's quite simple. We just drag in the player over here, right? Mouse sensitivity 2 is aiming, just false by default. It becomes true when you right click. Now, what do we drag into gun? All right, guys, one thing I realized is we don't have a gun yet, so we're going to bring in a gun as well. But one thing that I don't want in this game, and you guys can test this out, is you can drag in the gun to this slot, and the gun is sort of going to rotate to the angle that you're going to look at. But that's not very ideal. I want the player to move as well. So feel free to drag in the gun here or the player. Both of these values will work. In my case, I want the player to rotate while you actually rotate the camera. So feel free to test it out. Dragging the player to the gun slot or dragging the gun to the gun slot. Either way is fine. If you're dragging the gun is going to rotate, right? If you're dragging the player is going to rotate. So that's personal preference. That's why I wanted to preface that and say that both of these will work. It's up to you. I'm going to go with the player. Now, if I test it out, I can see that I can actually rotate angles, which is pretty good when I'm in the aiming mode. I can actually go back to my movements, right? And I can aim as usual. And I can jump as usual. And I can aim as usual. Awesome. That looks really good. So that's it for the lesson, guys. This works really well. In the next lesson, we're going to set up the gun. And then we're going to set up the shooting mechanic. And then that basically concludes the player combat system. Awesome. Thanks, guys.